Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. We come now in our ongoing series on the Westminster Shorter Catechism to question 76, which asks, which is the Ninth Commandment? And the answer is, the Ninth Commandment is, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Now, we're going to, in future segments, look at this in more detail. We're going to unpack this, saying, well, what does this affirm that we're supposed to do, and what does this affirm that we're not allowed to do? But before we get to that, I want to talk about bearing false witness against the law against bearing false witness. That is, we have a propensity, and I understand it, and I've used it. In fact, I use it in my head to keep track of where everything goes, to come up with sort of summaries of these laws that may not be accurate. If I were to go and ask the average person on the street, what are the 10 Commandments? First of all, I venture to guess I wouldn't be able to get very many good, solid answers. I remember being at a conference in a church that sat about 2,000 people. My father was speaking, and he asked, how many of you, he asked to be honest, how many of you could list the 10 Commandments in order? He wasn't asking for a word perfect, but he was asking for the actual commandments. And there were literally 2 people in the room that raised their hands out of 2,000. Pretty sad. This is at a Christian conference. Now, again, one of the ways that we try to remember is we come up with a kind of shorthand version of it. And one of the things that we come up with a shorthand version of for this, the Ninth Commandment, is we turn it into, thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not lie. Now, what's interesting is that on one hand, this thou shalt not lie is wildly more broad than what the command actually says. And yet, on the other hand, it sort of ends up unduly narrowing down the actual meaning of the text. I don't know how those can both be true, but I'm going to try to break that down for you. And to do that, I want to remind you that I've been blessed over the last several years to teach courses on ethics. And it is fairly standard procedure in an ethics class to explore this question, and to do so in the context of, well, is it ever okay to lie? And usually the conversation winds its way into the situation where we're asked, okay, you're hiding Jews during the World War II, and the Nazis are at your door, and they want to know if you're hiding Jews, and what do you do? What is the right thing to do? It's one of those places where this distinction matters. If God said, thou shalt not lie, and it's a lie to say there are no Jews here, then that answers the question very clearly and very easily. If, however, it is somewhat more narrow in circumstance, as I'm going to argue that it is, then you may be perfectly free to do that. In fact, that is going to be my position, but I don't want to steal any future thunder. I think there are circumstances where it's perfectly fitting and appropriate to tell a lie. I don't believe there are places where it's fitting and appropriate to bear false witness against one's neighbor. And we'll, again, over time, try to unpack that to make it clearer for everybody. But for now, I just wanted to say that ham-fisted translation into "thou shalt not lie" is going to put you in a place where Well, not only are you going to put yourself in a place where you're going to face some difficult circumstances where it's going to feel better to lie, like to the Nazis, but you're also going to find yourself butting up against what seems to be, anyway, again, I'm leaving room for the other view, but what seems to be a biblical endorsement of non-truth-telling, specifically in the situation of the Hebrew midwives and also Rahab, both of whom told untruths, both of whom lied, and both of whom are praised, though, again, one of the defenses for the position that takes the no, it's never right to lie, is that it's true. The text never says that God praises them because they lied. So this is a tough one, and it's a subtle one. This particular question, question 76, is not so subtle because all they have to do is answer the question of what the commandment is, which they do just fine. They, if you will, tell the truth that the Ninth Commandment is not. You must tell the truth, but rather the Ninth Commandment is, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Now, I'm going to concede from the beginning that our inclination, our default position ought to be telling the truth, but I am going to argue that the Bible does leave room in certain circumstances to not only be free to not tell the truth, but have an obligation to not tell the truth. But you will have to wait for future segments for us to talk about that. Well, once again, it's time for another Curating Your Movie Library segment, but sadly, this time I'm not able to welcome my precious wife onto the segment, so that means this time another top 5 list. This list is the top 5 movies you probably have never heard of. The top 5 movies you've probably never heard of. Now, you'll have to excuse me if you have heard of them, but if you haven't, then maybe you should check them out. And by the way, I don't know which or if any of these are streaming or where they may be streaming or any of that nature. I just want to put these names in your mind and see if you have heard of it, what you think, and if not, when you do see them, what you think. I'm going to start with number 5. Number 5, best movie you've never heard of, is probably the one you're most likely to have heard of. It's called Adventureland. It's probably 15 to 20 years old, so it's not necessarily too far out of reach for many of you listeners. And it's got a reasonably well-known star in Jesse Eisenberg, the fellow who plays... he plays the guy who gave us Zuckerberg. He plays Mark Zuckerberg in some movie. In this particular movie, and this is one of the reasons why it's so good, it's set in Pittsburgh in 1987, and Eisenberg is late high school, early college, I'm not sure, so it maybe that's why I liked it, because it hit me where I lived, but it really is quite touching and poignant, and I'd encourage you to check it out. It's called Adventureland. I don't know how closely, but I suspect it is rather closely connected to Kennywood Park, the famous amusement park there in Pittsburgh that once was called the roller coaster capital of the world. Number 4, The Stone of Destiny. This was one of those movies that I was sort of stretching my wife's patience when I came across it on a streaming service, thinking, well, I'm going to like this, and I'm going to hope she will. And she really did. It's based on a true story. It has to do with relations between the English and the Irish, and I just encourage you to check it out and enjoy it. It's got comedic elements. It's got not suspense, but I don't know what the word for it is. Drama, I guess. And again, quite good, quite enjoyable. It's called The Stone of Destiny. It's probably the next least likely to be unknown by you. These last three, I'm guessing you probably do not know about at all. And they begin with number 3, Excalibur. Now, before I tell you about Excalibur, let me give you a quick warning. There's a scene, probably a couple scenes in Excalibur that are very, that call for some quick fast forwarding. There's some explicit sexuality that's not necessary in the least, but it is in there. But apart from that, it was good enough that when I went to college, this was actually shown to all the students in a particular class that everybody had to take. It tells the story of King Arthur in a way that is just really, really well done. By the way, but it includes a minor role for a very young Liam Neeson, as well as a young Patrick Stewart. So check out Excalibur, the story of of King Arthur and his sword. Let me also encourage you to look for a plethora of Christian symbolism that you will find there. That's number 3. So number 5 is Adventureland. Number 4 is Stone of Destiny. Number 3, Excalibur. Number 2, The Freshman. Now, I really might have considered putting the more recent version of The Freshman on this list, but I'm guessing you might have heard of that. The more recent version stars Matthew Broderick and Marlon Brando, and it's really quite good also. But I'm speaking of The Freshman, made during the silent era and starring the man that I believe was the greatest of the silent era stars. My order would go number 3, Charlie Chaplin, very good, but not the best. Number 2, Buster Keaton. And number 1, Harold Lloyd. Harold Lloyd is the star of The Freshman. It's a silent film about a young and earnest man that ends up going to college as a freshman. And it's just comedy, silent comedy gold. That's number 2, The Freshman with Harold Lloyd. What's number 1? Number 1, wow. This is a movie that I've only seen once, even though it's the number 1 movie you've never heard of. In fact, this would definitely be in my top 10 movies of all time, and yet I've only seen it once, and I've looked from time to time to see if I could track it down. It's hard to find. It's called To End All Wars. It is written, I believe, by... No, I don't want to say because I'll probably mess it up. But it is an outstanding movie, actually starring Kiefer Sutherland. And the writer/director is a professing Christian, and it shows. It's actually a story of a prisoner of war during the Vietnamese, or the war in Vietnam, and it's just really, really powerful and moving. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, do the work of checking it out or tracking it down and check it out. It's called To End All Wars. It stars Kiefer Sutherland. So that's my top 5 lists of movies you've never heard of. I would love to hear your list of the top 5 movies I've never heard of. I'm always looking for something new. Thank you so much for listening. It may be a sign that we are in a technological age that we tend to equate technology with machines. But technology is not just about machines. Technology includes in its range of meaning the entire idea of techniques. Human technology need not refer to mechanical pacemakers, but instead can refer to the systems by which we bring about changes in humans. Both a 10-ton bottle capping machine and an insightful question are tools. One keeps a bottle of soda from spilling and going flat on the way to market. The other, one hopes, provides insights toward spiritual growth. The difficulty is when we begin to see our friends, families, and our churches as an assembly line of bottles in need of the right cap. Much of the wise criticism that has been made against the church over the last 10 to 20 years falls into one of two Jeremiads. Sometimes we chasten the church for succumbing to that spirit of the age that we call the therapeutic revolution. Other times we chasten the church for bedding down a different spirit of the age that we call the managerial revolution. In the former, the church exists to soothe the tender spirits of the congregants, to keep the pop from losing its fizz with a dose of pop psychology. In the latter, the spiritual CEO organizes the troops and motivates them until they become an efficient ministry, machine. These two models for the church share two things in common. First, they are utterly unbiblical. Second, they are both technologically minded. They see the church and its members as products to be manipulated to bring about a desired end. The Bible, though, never describes the church in these technological terms. Never is the church called that which guides the soul toward health, nor that which provides the greatest efficiency for the building of the kingdom. The Bible has all sorts of analogies for the church, none of them technological. Instead, each of them is organic. The church is not a set of gears and levers covered in a faux veneer of vitality, a clockwork orange. Rather, it is a set of limbs and appendages, or, as Paul describes it in 1 Corinthians, a body. Of course, that might not steer us completely clear of our problem. We are so technological that we've come even to think of God's great gift of our own bodies as yet another machine to be tweaked to maximize efficiency. We see our parts as parts and miss the holiness of the whole. Paul has another image for us, however, that is particularly difficult to reduce to something made. Paul has another image for us, however, that is hard to reduce to something made down at the machine shop. Paul says that we are the church as a whole, the bride of Christ. Brides are not given to technology. No, I'm not saying that tools are a man thing and ladies should stand clear. Rather, what I'm saying is that when we think bride, we necessarily think in organic and not in machine terms. No one says as the bride walks down the aisle, "Mercy, look at the torque she's able to handle with her medial collateral ligaments." No one says to the bride, "You know, that veil of yours is not ergonomically designed for the giving of a kiss. Why not leave it off?" No one brings a stopwatch to measure the bride's time in getting up the aisle. A bride is not meant to be efficient, but to be beautiful. We will not, however, ever read a church bulletin that reads, "First Community Church by the Freeway's purpose is to look really, really nice for Jesus." Or, "Our first priority here at Our Lady of the Perpetual Committee Non-Denominational International Family Center is to clean up ourselves real good for the wedding day." That, however, is the health and the business of the church. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be proclaiming the good news or that we must cease and desist from visiting the sick. I'm not saying we can never have a church picnic for the sake of fellowship or never deliver turkeys to the poor. Instead, we do these things, all that we do, in order to make us more beautiful as a bride. We're not a machine that needs to be honed, but a bride that needs to be beautified. That's what the groom has not only called us to do, but what he is doing in us. That's not all, though. Brides do far more, though never less, than look their best. We are indeed a trophy to our Lord. But we are more. Brides have other callings as well, the first of which is to love and to honor the groom. The problem with machines is that they lack heart, something the church must cultivate. We are to grow in our love of Christ, to love him more daily, not with our gears and our levers, but with our hearts and souls, minds and strengths. That's why we study him and his word, why we meet him at his table. That is why our preachers preach his glory, to fill our hearts with sincere affections. That we are a bride is a given. We were made for such. And so when we take a technological approach to our calling, we turn our groom into a machine. He is not a machine. He is not a tool by which, if we punch in the right code, we can have happy, successful, well-ordered lives. He, our groom, is not a means, which is all tools are, to some other end. Instead, our groom is the end. He is our delight and our joy. Not because of what he has done, not because of what he now does, not because of what he will do, but because of what he is. He will succeed. He will, because our groom is altogether sovereign in authority and in power. He will get us to see what he has already told us, that we are his spotless bride. And when we see it, maybe then we will be spotless, besmirched with neither grease nor sin. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.